Hey, what's going on everybody? Commander Crane here, and we are back with another spoiler video. We are going to be looking at the cards from Murders at Karlov Manor. I'm very excited to talk about a lot of these cards, so before we hop into the video, we're not going to be showing necessarily every spoiler, mostly the spicy cards. So I'm not going to be showing a ton of the commons that are just like draft cards. We're going to be looking at all the spicy new legends and rares and things like that. If there's a card that I forgot to include that I definitely should have included on the list, just let me know in the comments section below, and feel free to check out the original video that we made, which talked about the initial cards that Wizards of the Coast had showed off initially. So let's go on and hop into it here. So I'm not going to be talking super in-depth on every card, kind of just like at face value what I think about the card. So all right, first card, Assemble the Players. 1 and a white enchantment. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. Once each turn, you may cast a creature spell with power 2 or less from the top of your library. This card is fantastic, I think, for low to the ground, specifically white aggro decks. With power 2 or less, I mean like a card like, I'm trying to think, like maybe humans, maybe even like spirits could possibly play this. It's really good at it seems like mid-range and control, just because obviously you can just cast from the top of your library, which is pretty good. So I'm definitely a big fan of this card. Next card is Steam Core Scholar, 2/2 for 2 and a blue. Weird detective with flying and vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards, unless you discard an instant, a sorcery, or a creature card with flying. So, actually, funny enough, my brother was the first one to point this out. With the creature with flying is kind of cool if you wanted to play this in like a favorable winds deck, or really anything, you know. It's a instant or sorcery card, so if you're playing like a weird like spells in like instant sorcery in the graveyard matters kind of thing, you could do something like that. So I'm definitely a big fan of Steam Core Scholar. Man, how far his win rate came. Seriously, I mean, like now it's got vigilance and all this upside. But anyways, so next card is It Doesn't Add Up. 3 black instant, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield suspected, which is a new mechanic, which means it has menace and can't block. So first thing I want to point out, this is the first 5 mana instant speed reanimation card that we've seen in Pioneer. All the other ones are like 5 mana sorcery, and they have some sort of like upside, like put some counters on it, or do something else. I can't think of all of them right now, but they've been doing these for a while. This is the first instant speed one. But the thing is obviously it is suspected, so it has menace and can't block. So it's not like you can flash this in and blow your opponent out with a block, which obviously is that's a good middle ground. But I think it's more interesting just because of the fact that, hey, we have instant speed 5 mana ones now. So now is Wizards of the Coast, are they going to keep pressing it now? Is the next one that we get going to be an instant? Only time will tell. I'm sure it'll happen inevitably, but just something I wanted to include. I think it is interesting, but I do think this card is pretty strong though, especially if you're playing Commander, if you're playing like a reanimation deck. I think this card's very, very good. So just wanted to also throw that on here. Excuse me. Next card is Judith Carnage Connoisseur. 3/4 for 3 black-red legendary creature human shaman. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, choose one. That spell gains Death Touch and Lifelink, which is pretty sweet, or create a 2/2 red imp creature token with, when this creature dies, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. Honestly, both modes are pretty good. The spell with Death Touch and Lifelink is sweet, so for just in case if people don't know with Death Touch, for instance, like if you play End the Festivities, for instance, your End the Festivities deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. It has Death Touch, so it kills all of your opponent's creatures, and guess what? It also, you gain a bunch of life with it, which is pretty sweet. That's definitely the coolest thing you can do with this, but even making a 2/2 red imp that's a pretty good rate, so I definitely like this card. It's very strong. One thing that I'm probably going to say in this video more than once is there's a lot of like B- cards in this set. Cards that are like, strong, solid cards, but nothing like too broken or that's going to be like taking over the format, or like, format as in like Standard or Pioneer. But a lot of these cards are just like strong. That's kind of what they are. But anyways, so next card is Pyrotechnic Performer, 3/2 for 2 Viashino Assassin. A lot of assassins in this set. Disguise for a red, which means we can cast it face down for 3 as a 2/2 creature with Ward 2. So for those who used to do what was it? The morph cards. It's a morph, but it has Ward 2. And then you can turn it face up anytime for its disguise cost, which is 1 red. Whenever it or another creature you control is turned face up, that creature deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So obviously a very good payoff for disguise, but also like morph and megamorph as well. Spoiler alert, definitely plan on me building a deck tech in the future with a card like this. don't be surprised if I end up doing it. The first card I thought of with this was like Death Mist Raptor from, years ago in Khans of Tarkir. That was kind of the first card I thought of. Sorry, Dragons of Tarkir is not from Khans. But anyways, definitely a very, very cool card. And also, I have a thing for like bad creature types, and Viashino is definitely one of those. So I hope we get a lot more Viashino cards in the set. Next card, we have Case of the Stash Skeleton, 2-mana enchantment Case creature type. When this case enters the battlefield, make a 2/1 skeleton and suspect it, which means it has menace it can't block. And then to solve the case, you control no suspected skeletons, which means it has to die or it has to get the suspect removed from it. But if unsolved, solve at the beginning of your end step. And then solved for 1 and a black, sacrifice this case, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle, which is pretty sweet. My main thing I want to include with this is, it's a solid card in its own right. I think this will see some play, especially in like Commander. But the main thing is they're making a lot of skeleton cards. So we have this card, and then I know in Lost Caverns we had the Corpses of the Lost or whatever. Keep an eye out for skeleton cards. If you're thinking about building a skeleton deck, I highly suggest picking them up sooner than later, because if they're going to make a bunch of skeletons, I think a lot of those cards, like the older ones that are good, are definitely going to go up in price. So just wanted to keep that in mind here. So next slide, Ripper of Bloodlines. I did have to get the translation one because the one that was supposed was Japanese. 6/5 for 6, Vampire Assassin with flying with ward, sacrifice a creature. Whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Pretty much just a really big, what is it? Blood Artist. That's essentially what it is. Just a really big Blood Artist. Vampire Assassin. Vampire's definitely a very relevant creature type. Assassin, we'll kind of see. They're making a lot of Assassins in this set, so we'll kind of see where the Assassin creature type fits in there. But just a really solid demon. This card's probably going to be like a $10 card because it's a vampire and it's big and, whatever. Commander players are going to love it. So, but yes, I'm definitely a big fan of this card. Then the next 2-mana detectives, Homicide Investigator, 2/2 for 2. Whenever one or more non-token creatures you control die, investigate. It triggers only once each turn. That's just a pretty good rate. Dying and then getting a clue. That's a solid rate, 2/2 for 2. Next card. Sharp-Eyed Rookie, 2/2 for 2 with Vigilance. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if its power or toughness is greater than Sharp-Eyed Rookie's toughness, put a +1/+1 counter on it and investigate. This is basically like a Tireless Tracker, but I don't want to say better per se, but it's very interesting. It gets the counters, it investigates, so it's just very, very similar to Tireless Tracker. Definitely a huge fan of this card. It's really good. It reminds me of like an Experiment one and a Tireless Tracker kind of mixed into one. It's just really good. Added to the list of really good green 2/2s for 2 with a lot of upside. It's just the next card on that list. So, next slide. We have No Witnesses, 2 white sorcery. Each player who controls the most creatures investigates, then destroy all creatures. So, this is just another card of the whole 4-mana potential draw board wipe. Like the first one we saw was Shatter the Sky, then they made Depopulate, and then now we have No Witnesses. So, in those 3, personally, I think Depopulate is the strongest of the bunch because not a lot of decks play multicolor creatures. That's the one I think is the best. But No Witnesses is the main one that's in Standard. Although Depopulate is still in Standard, it is going to rotate quicker than No Witnesses. But I still think it's pretty strong though. If you're playing like a creature deck that also maybe wants a board wipe, especially in Commander, at least if you have to board wipe, at least you get to investigate. I guess that kind of makes sense. But anyways, it's just another solid board wipe. It's a 4-mana Wrath. Of course, it's going to be solid. So next card. So I didn't include the entire list here, but this is the new dual land cycle, and this one is the Golgari one, Underground Mortuary. It has the typing, so Swamp Forest. It enters the battlefield tapped, and when it enters the battlefield, Surveil 1. It's an extremely good card. I think this dual land cycle is just, it's not super good, but it's not super bad. It's right in the middle. If you're playing temples, this is pretty much better than all your temples. So, for those who like to play a lot of the temples, it's a little sad because the temples are strictly worse for the most part now. But the one cool thing is with this, with fetch lands, you can fetch these out. So, if you're just going to go, end step, fetch, you can just play this tapped in Surveil 1, which is pretty sweet. The other thing that's good, and I think this is very important, at least for like Pioneer players, especially on the budget level, is they have the dual land typing, so you can play check lands after these. So you can go Underground Mortuary, and then you could play a Wooded Cemetery, for instance. The typing is definitely pretty sweet on these. You know, for instance, if you also have like a Farseek, you can Farseek these out and then Surveil one, which is pretty sweet. So I'm just a huge fan of this in general. I like the typing. I like the Surveil one. It's just pretty sweet. Next card is War Leader's Call. This is the card I see a lot of people talking about. 1 red, white enchantment. Creatures you control get +1/+1. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, War Leader's Call deals 1 damage to each opponent. Essentially, they took an Impact Tremors and they put an Anthem and they just threw it together, and now we have War Leader's Call. Again, another like B- card. I think this card is strong. It could potentially see some play in like the Boros Convoke decks. But you know, typically they're trying to like do their Boros Convoke thing a little bit earlier than, you know, turn 4 for the most part, but I still think it's really good. Like if you're still doing like a, you know, Voldaren Epicure with the oh gosh, I'm forgetting, you know, it's 1 red, you get 3 1/1s, destroy an artifact, that kind of thing. I'm forgetting the name of that card all of a sudden. I see it all the time, but I think that card's really good with this. We'll kind of see what happens, but I really do like War Leader's Call. Next slide, we have Voha, Jaws of the Conclave. This is also one of the cards that is in a pre-release kit. You can't play it in your kit, well, in your pre-release, but it's one of the 3 cards that is featured in the pre-release kit. 5/5 for 5, 2 red, green, white, Vigilance, Trample with Ward 3. When it attacks, put X 1/1 counters on each creature you control, or X is the number of elves you control. Draw a card for each wolf you control. Very interesting, you know, with the wolf and the elf part of it. It makes sense because it's with Tolsmir, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong on that. But there's a little bit of synergy with the wolves elves thing. So a couple of things I want to talk about. So I already have a deck worked out for this, for an upcoming deck tech. For those who don't watch the channel a lot, I do a lot of deck techs for Pioneer. I already have a deck ready to go. It's essentially, I'm just kind of waiting for the rest of the set to come out to see if there's any new cards that'll be included, but it's going to be very sweet. The second thing I wanted to talk about, the first thing I thought of when I saw this card was Changelings. Changelings have all creature types. So if you want to play a commander deck with this, for instance, just play Chameleon Colossus and Taurian Mauler and like every other creature you can think of that is good and has Changeling. That means you just get both modes. You put X 1/1 counters on all your dudes and draw a card with all of them. But what's also sweet is if you want to play this in Pioneer, you could also play like Land of Elves and Elvish Mystic and just ramp into some wolves, which is pretty sweet. So, you know, you get the 1/1 counters from your mana dorks, you draw some cards from your wolves. It's just a really sweet card. But do keep in mind, werewolves do not trigger this card. So don't put a bunch of werewolf pack leaders and stuff in your deck and think it's going to be super good, and then it's not. I just wanted to include that as well. So, next card, Tristani 3 Whispers. Probably the card that I'm almost the most excited for in this set. 4/4 for green, green-white hybrid in 1. So 3 mana 4/4. It's basically a lock set on Smiter. Let's keep looking. What else does it do? 1 and a green gives a creature Death Touch until end of turn. Green or white gives a creature Vigilance until end of turn. And 2 and a white gives a creature Double Strike until end of turn. This, again, another B- card. I'd maybe even give this card a B or a B+. It's a 4/4 for 3, an extremely good rate. Not as good as it was for the most part, but it's still really good. And it has 3 very relevant abilities. I'm a big fan of this card. I'm going to be playing this in Pioneer for sure. You know, another card that's probably going to be about a $5 card just because it's an extremely good rate. Next card, Tomic Wielder of Law. It's one of the other pre-release cards. 2/4 for 1 black-white. Affinity for Planeswalkers, which means this spell costs 1 less to cast for each Planeswalker you control. Has Flying and Vigilance. Whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you and or a Planeswalker you control, that opponent loses 3 life and you draw a card. So it's just a good rate. If they're attacking with a bunch of creatures, you get a little bit of value from it. The affinity from Planeswalkers is funny just because, you know, it only has 1 colorless, so it only covers that. But I think part of the idea too is you play this in like a Planeswalker deck in Commander. You play a couple Planeswalkers, it dies, goes to the command zone, so that way you can still just pay it for like black and a white, which, I mean, hey, a 2 mana 2/4 Flying Vigilance, that's an extremely good rate. So if you just keep the affinity high, so that way you only have to pay like 2 mana for it, it's pretty sweet. So definitely a big fan of Tomic. Don't know how relevant it's going to be for the most part, especially in like Pioneer, but you could definitely make it happen though. You definitely could make this card work. So, all right, next card, we have Tolsmir Midnight's Light. 2 green, white, 3/2 with a lifelink legendary Elf Scout. When it enters the battlefield, create Voha, a legendary 5/5 green and white wolf creature token with trample. So right off the bat, 5 mana, you're getting 8 power worth of creatures. Fantastic. Whenever a wolf you control attacks, if Tolsmir attack this combat, target creature an opponent controls blocks that wolf this combat if able. And remember, this triggers each wolf whenever a wolf you control attacks. So if you attack with 3 wolves, you get to line up blockers, which is pretty sweet. Obviously, your opponent can still add additional blockers in front of that, so it's not like it's like unblockable, you're just blowing them out every time. But this card is definitely very strong. I'm a huge fan of Tolsmir. Really, all the Tolsmirs are pretty solid for the most part. It definitely just has all this energy of wolves are attacking or, you know, dealing damage, that kind of thing. So definitely a big fan of it. Next card is Teysa, Opulent Oligarch. Hopefully I pronounced that right. 2/3 for 3 with Death Touch, legendary human advisor. At the beginning of your end step, investigate for each opponent who lost life this turn. Solid. Whenever a clue you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, create a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token flying. This ability triggers only once each turn. Solid. Again, another B- card. In 60 card, it's not quite what you want for the most part. You know, each opponent who lost life this turn, obviously there's like 1,000 different ways. You can extort, for instance, boom, each opponent loses 1 life. There's a ton of different ways you can trigger that. The clue thing is solid. I think it'd be a little bit better if it wasn't only once each turn. So that, I get why it is, though. That would be very strong. You know, you just like sacrifice a clue to Atog, boom, make a 1/1, trigger something else, make another clue or something like that. I definitely see why it's only once each turn. But again, I think just another solid card. Next card, though, is a little bit better than solid. No More Lies. White and blue instant. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. So I have been talking for probably about 2 years now about how we need Mana Leak in Pioneer. While this is better and worse than Mana Leak, I'm fine with it. We don't need Mana Leak anymore. I'm kind of okay with it. Again, I don't even play blue decks with counter spells, and I've been wanting it to see play in the format just because a lot of the counter spells are generally underwhelming. But this card is very strong. I mean, it's Mana Leak, but a little bit better. It's like a Mana Leak with what's that card called? It's the blue and X Syncopate. Yeah, that's what it is. It's basically that combined. No More Lies. Fantastic card. Blue-white mages. Rejoice. Next slide. We have Melik. Reforged Researcher. Star 3 blue-red. Its power and toughness is equal to twice the number of instant sorcery cards in your graveyard. And the first instant or sorcery spell you cast each turn costs 3 less to cast. Very strong. This card can get really big, really out of control in the right deck. And the first instant or sorcery spell being 3 less to cast at the beginning is sweet. First thing I think of, Apex of Power. You play this, next turn you play Apex of Power and just kind of blow out your opponent. Next card, Massacre Girl, Known Killer, 4/4 for 4, legendary human assassin with menace. Creatures you control have Wither. Wither is back. They deal damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters. It's almost like half of Infect. And then whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, if its toughness was less than 1, draw a card. Which, spoiler alert, with Wither, they deal the damage. If they die, the power was, or its toughness was less than 1, so you get to draw a card. The card is just very strong. Definitely a big fan of the new Massacre Girl. Next card is Long Goodbye. Guess what? It's basically Eliminate, but can't be countered. Destroy target creature or planeswalker with mana value 3 or less. Card is very strong. It's just a strict upgrade from Eliminate, which was already a pretty solid removal spell, and now it can't be countered. That's all there is to say. Next slide. We have Kylox, Visionary Inventor, 4/4 for 5, blue-red, legendary Viashino Artificer with Menace, Ward 2, and Haste. When it attacks, sacrifice any number of other creatures, then exile the top X cards of your library, where X is their total power. You may cast any number of instant or sorcery spells from among the exiled cards without paying their mana cost. Okay. My first thought on this card, again, it's really just a commander card. But what would be so annoying for your opponents, but really cool for you, is if you build a blue-red, like, steel deck, so it just plays active treasons and control magics, and then you just sacrifice your opponent's creatures that you steal to get the ability from that. That's my first thought with Kylox. Again, that would be excruciating for your opponent, but for you who's playing the deck, it would be sweet and you'd be getting a ton of value. So just keep that in mind, I guess, if you're building that. Let me know in the comment section below what you would build with a Kylox deck. I'm a big fan of Viashinos. Who knows, maybe I'll throw something together. Next card is Krenko, Baron of Tin Street, 3/3 for 3 with haste. Tap, sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on each goblin you control. And it has whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay a red. If you do, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. It gains haste until end of turn. So a couple things we need to talk about. It says whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard. So it's not just you. Keep that in mind. The second thing is treasures with this are fantastic. You just sacrifice a treasure, trigger. Whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard, pay the red mana. Boom, get a goblin. So essentially all your treasures are 1/1 goblins with haste, which is pretty cool. But it also has the tap, sacrifice an artifact, put a 1/1 counter on each goblin. So you can activate the ability, and then the artifact is put into the graveyard, which triggers the ability. So you make the goblin, and then you can put the 1/1 counter on each goblin you control. So that essentially is like a 2/2 goblin for the most part. But definitely a big fan of Krenko. So it's not as good as the original one, but it's better than like the War of the Spark one. So it's kind of right in the middle. Solid goblin, but definitely not the best of the bunch. Next card is Crawl Whipcracker. Reminds me of Crawl Harpooner, kind of in a way. 3/2 for Golgari with Reach Insect Assassin. Again, another assassin card. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target token an opponent controls. Solid. I mean, even without the ETB, it's a 3/2 for 2 with Reach. That's an extremely good rate. And then obviously we can destroy a token. Again, the token, it can be, for instance, a clue token that's in the set. You know, destroy a copy token, destroy a treasure token, destroy a whatever token. Doesn't matter. It just destroys a token. So it's just a really good card. Again, another one of those like B- cards that's really good in the set. So next card, we have Kellen, Inquisitive Prodigy. So one of the, I think it's the only adventure card in the set, but legendary creature, Human Fairy Detective. Tail the suspect, I was going to say Golgari. For Simic, Sorcery, Investigate. You may play an additional land this turn. And then the flip side, 3/4 Flying and Vigilance. Whenever Kellen attacks, destroy up to 1 target artifact. If you controlled that permanent, draw a card. So a couple things I want to talk about with this card. Obviously, the front side of it is basically, it's kind of an explorer, kind of, in a way. And then the other side, obviously, being able to destroy an artifact is good for multiple reasons. One, it basically just says draw a card, because you can target your clue, destroy it, and draw a card, which you were going to be doing that anyways. But obviously, if your opponent's playing some really annoying artifact, like if they're playing like a Smuggler's Copter, or if they're playing a really good mana rock like a Thran Dynamo, you can blow that up, which is pretty sweet. The other thing, and I don't think a lot of people are talking about this, you can just go right into it. So you play the additional land each turn, you play your extra land, next turn, play your land drop, boom, you can play Kellen. So you can just go turn 2, investigate, play another land, turn 3, Kellen, Flying Vigilance. That's an extremely good rate. I don't know how good this card's going to be for the most part, especially in Pioneer, but hey, being able to go turn 2 that, turn 3, 3/4 Flying and Vigilance, that's a pretty solid rate. So next card, Kaya, Spirit's Justice, 2 black-white, for 3 loyalty, legendary planeswalker Kaya. Whenever one or more creatures you control and or creature cards in your graveyard are put into exile, you may choose a creature card from among them until end of turn. Target token you control becomes a copy of it, except it has flying. Then add 2 loyalty, surveil 2, then exile a card from a graveyard. +1, make a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying, and then -2, exile target creature you control. For each other player, exile up to 1 target creature that player controls. This card, it's just an extremely good rate. Obviously, you have all the exile effects going with it, so that way you can make your tokens you control copies of those. So the idea, play your spirits, exile creatures, that kind of thing, make it copies of it, so you're just getting a lot of value from that. Definitely a big fan of Kaya. We'll kind of see how good the card is, but I think it's pretty solid. Next card is Azoni, Center of the Web, 5/4 for 4 black-green with Menace, Elf Detective. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may collect Evidence 4. If you do, create 2/2/1 black and green spider creature tokens with Menace and Reach. It doesn't have anything on this card, but Evidence, we'll kind of get more into it in a minute, but essentially it's exile cards from your graveyard that equal 4 mana value, so it can be any card, just whatever Evidence 4, and then sacrifice 4 tokens, surveil 2, then draw 2 cards, you gain 2 life. Again, speaks Commander for sure. If you're playing a token deck with this, with really anything, I mean, you could play a ham sandwich, it doesn't matter, just Golgari tokens, sacrifice 4 tokens, get a ton of value. Definitely a big fan of Azoni in general. So next slide, we have Galvanize, one of the few commons I actually wanted to feature in this. 1 in a red instant. Galvanize deals 3 damage to target creature. If you've drawn 2 or more cards this turn, Galvanize deals 5 damage to that creature instead. First thing that reaches out to me is like a Rakdos sacrifice list with drawing a ton of cards, especially with like, what's a Deadly Dispute, for instance. You can just boom, draw 2 cards, and then boom, Galvanize. This card's really good. If you're playing a Spells Matters deck where you're playing like Opt and Consider and stuff, this is a really good card. And it's 2 or more cards this turn, so you can just draw your main card for the turn, and then boom, Opt, Galvanize. This card's really, really good. Definitely a big fan of this. Probably going to end up being one of the better commons in draft for sure. Next card is Atrada, Deadly Fugitive. 1/4 for 1, blue-black. Legendary creature, Vampire Assassin with Death Touch. Face down creatures you control have 2 blue-black. Turn this creature face up. If you can't, exile it. Then you may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. Whenever an assassin you control deals combat damage to an opponent, cloak the top card of that player's library. I don't know what that is quite yet with Cloak, but I probably imagine it probably comes in as the 2/2 for 3 or something like that. It's just a face-down creature. That's probably my guess. I don't know if we've gotten the official what Cloak is yet for the most part, but that would be, you know, what I imagine because it's face-down creatures you control, so it probably just goes upside down as like a 1/1 or a 2/2. That would be my guess. So, next card is Crime Novelist. 1/3 for 2 and a red Goblin Bard. Whenever you sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on Crime Novelist and add a red. So, obviously this has a ton of combo potential. And the combo that I could think of anyways is with Animation Module. If you have Animation Module in any sacrifice outlet, this goes infinite. You put infinite 1/1 counters on Crime Novelist. You don't make infinite mana unless you have 2 Crime Novelists, but obviously that's not completely unrealistic. But anyways, so there's an infinite combo with that, and guess what? That's in Pioneer. I just figured I would include that. So if you really wanted to build like a black-red, you know, combo deck with this, you definitely can do that. Just wanted to include that as well with the card. But it's very, very strong in general. So, next slide here. Case of the Ransack Lab. 2 and a blue. Instant sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. It's also an enchantment case. And then to solve the case, you cast 4 more instant and sorcery spells this turn. If unsolved, solve at the beginning of your next end step, and then solved whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. So this is just going to be a good card. Spellslinger decks, people that play a lot of blue instant sorcery spells matters. This is definitely the card for you. I think this is probably the best case that we've seen so far, but we'll kind of see what happens, but it's very, very strong. So this next card gets my award for the best medium green creature in the set. Axebane Feryx, 4/4 for 2 green beast with Death Touch and Haste, and Ward Collect Evidence 4, which means whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or an ability opponent controls, countered unless that player exiles cards with total mana value 4 or greater from their graveyard. Excuse me, had a little bit of a yawn coming, but essentially this is just kind of worse Questing Beast, but it does have the Ward. One thing I want to include that's pretty cool with this card, if you're playing like Rest in Peace, for instance, it's basically just hexproof. If you keep hating on your opponent's graveyard, they're never going to be able to collect evidence pretty much with this, and then you're just going to, it's just Death Touch Haste with hexproof, which is pretty sweet. But I do think it's a little bit worse than Questing Beast, but it is still pretty solid. If you want to play this in Standard or even Pioneer, it's going to be pretty good overall. Death Touch and Haste, 4/4/4. Pretty darn good rate. Next card is Aurelia's Vindicator, probably my favorite disguise card that I've seen in the set so far. So 4/2 for 2 white with flying lifelink Ward 2. Then has Disguise X3 and a white, which I think we went over Disguise. We did go over it already, but for 3 mana, you play this on the backside. Apparently high CPU is detected, so that's kind of funny. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of that. But anyways, so Disguise 3 white and X. So when it becomes undisguised, 3 mana, 2/2 with Ward 2. When it's turned face up, exile up to X other target creatures from the battlefield and or creature cards from graveyards. And then when it leaves the battlefield, return the exiled cards to their owner's hand. It's not Angel of Jubilation or maybe Angel of Serenity. All I remember is there was this really big angel from the Return to Ravnica. I think it was like an 8 mana, like 7 or 8 mana flyer. Actually, I think it was a 6/6 flyer. For 8 or 7 with flying. It pretty much had the same effect. It was like exile 3. That's essentially what this is. It's like a minier version with a little bit higher upside technically. That's basically what this card is. I think it's really strong. In limited especially. I mean, 4/2 flying lifelink Ward 2 is pretty hard to beat. So this card is good. I'm a big fan of Aurelia's Vindicator. So next slide here, which hopefully it's going to let me go to it, but I know it was acting weird. There we go. Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, I think this is our last slide here. I believe it is, which we will find out in just a moment. But Assassin's Trophy, it's returning. Fantastic reprint. This card, man, I remember when this was first in Standard. It was like a $20 card. Didn't reprint it for a long time. They reprinted it in Double Masters, and then boom, we get it back in Standard. Definitely a big fan of this card. It's really, really good. There's really nothing I can say. Assassin's Trophy is just a fantastic card. Next card is Analyze the Pollen. 1 green sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may collect evidence 8. Search your library for a basic land card. If evidence was collected, instead search for your library for a creature or land card. Reveal that card, put it into your hand. So this card is just good. It's essentially like a Traverse the Uvenwald for the most part. What's really cool, again, is it's creature or land, so you don't have to grab a basic land at that point. It's just a good card. Kind of reminds me of like a Worldly Tutor in a way, but you got to work for it a little bit. Just another really solid green card. Next card is Ogris Koss, Spirit of Justice. 2 red, white, 2/4 with double strike vigilance, Spirit Detective. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, choose up to 1 target creature. If it's suspected, exile it. Otherwise, suspect it. So a suspected creature has menace and can't block, which you could do a couple different things with this. So you can attack. You can make your own creature have menace, which makes it harder for your opponents to be able to block it. You can make your opponent's creature suspected. That way it can't block, which is pretty sweet. But if you also want to just get rid of it, you make it suspected, and then the next turn you attack again, and it's just exiled. So a lot of flexibility with this card. There's, again, you could go either way with this. You could either have it like a mid-range deck and try to take out your opponent's creatures, or you can just play aggro and make it really hard for your opponent's creatures being able to block. Anyways, just a really, really good card. I'm a huge fan of Ogris Koss. I think this is our last slide. Let's find out, though. It was our last slide. I know I made this whole slide. I kind of whipped it together for the most part, just because obviously there's a lot of new spoilers coming out, which this will be the only video being released today. I will try to release one within the next 1 or 2 days with all the new cards that are coming out. And hopefully we get to see the new mole guy here. I'm really excited to see that card. So anyways, thanks for watching this video. Let me know in the comment section below. What do you think about all the spoilers so far? Which one is your favorite card? Just let me know in the comment section below. So I'm Commander Crane. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.